27. It says up there 19 to 27. And then from Mark chapter 7. Just pull the mic down.
This first reading is from James chapter 1, verses 7 to 27. Every good gift and every perfect present comes from heaven. It comes down from God, the creator of the heavenly lights, who does not change or cause darkness by turning. By his own will he brought us into being through the word of truth, so that we should have first place among all his creatures. Remember this, my dear brothers. Everyone must be quick to listen, but slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Man's anger does not achieve God's righteous purpose. So get rid of every filthy habit and all wicked conduct. Submit to God and accept the word that he plants in your hearts, which is able to save you. Do not deceive yourselves by just listening to his word. Instead, put it into practice. Whoever listens to the word but does not put into practice is like a man who looks in a mirror and sees himself as he is. He takes a good look at himself and then goes away and at once forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks closely into the perfect law that sets people free, who keeps on paying attention to it and does not simply listen and then forget it, but puts it into practice, that person will be blessed by God in what he does. Does anyone think he is religious? If he does not control his tongue, his religion is worthless and he deceives himself. What God the Father considers to be pure and genuine religion is this: to take care of orphans and widows in their suffering, and to keep oneself from being corrupted by the world. And the second reading from Mark's Gospel, chapter 7. Some Pharisees and teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered round Jesus. They noticed that some of his disciples were eating their food with hands that were ritually unclean. That is, they had not washed them in the way the Pharisees and people should. For the Pharisees, as well as the rest of the Jews, follow them the teaching they received from their ancestors. They do not eat unless they wash their hands in the proper way. Nor do they eat anything that comes from the market unless washed first. And they follow many other rules which they have received, such as the proper way to wash cups, pots, copper bowls, and beds. So the Pharisees and the teachers of the law asked Jesus, "Why is it that your disciples do not follow the teaching handed down by our ancestors, but instead eat with ritually unclean hands?" Jesus answered them, "How right Isaiah was when he prophesied about you. You are hypocrites, just as he wrote. These people, says God, honor me with their words, but their hearts is really far away from me. It is no use for them to worship me because they teach man-made rules as though they were God's laws. You put aside God's command and obey the teaching of men." Then Jesus called the crowd to him once more and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing that goes into a person from the outside which can make him ritually unclean. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that makes him unclean. For from the inside, from a person's heart, come the evil ideas which lead him to do immoral things, to rob, kill, commit adultery, be greedy, and do all sorts of evil things. Deceit, indecency, jealousy, slander, pride, and folly. All these evil things come from inside a person, and they make him unclean." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks for the God. Thank you, Pat. When I was a kid, going to church, preachers often started their sermon with a text. So I'm going to start with a text, but I've got two texts today, but actually it doesn't mean the sermon's going to be a bit longer than you normally got as a child. It might be a bit shorter, I think. But the first text is James chapter 1, verse 27. Up there it says a paraphrase format. Real religion, the kind that passes muster before God the Father, is this: reach out to the homeless and loveless in their plight and guard against corruption from the godless world. Let me read it from New Revised Standard Version. See if you can see the parallels. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. A bit hard not to let the world have some impact on your life, is it? And there you notice it mentions orphans and widows in the version I had, and that's because orphans and widows weren't provided for in the way the system was structured. But today it's more like the homeless and the loveless, the people we need to care for today. Now when I read this particular text, I ask myself, where is the place for worship as God's people? Because it says true religion, real religion is this: to care. Where is the place for worship? It doesn't seem to matter. In fact, when I was minister in Cairns, there was a woman who used to come to worship but had stopped. And I met her in the street one day, and she suggested to me she was now making better use of her time by not coming to worship because she was going and helping young people with disabilities riding horses on Sunday morning. That text, if I'd been trying to use that as an answer, didn't provide me with any support from my point of view. It provided support for her point of view. And this definition of true religion from the letter of James gave me no way to challenge her viewpoint. I probably wasn't thinking about this particular text when I spoke to her, but I guess I might have thought about the command to love God with your whole heart, soul, mind and strength. In Cairns, I was a part-time chaplain with Blue Care. In fact, when I first arrived, they had me signing the cheque for about 100 staff every fortnight. And I thought, do I need to do this? That's not real ministry from my point of view. We had an administrator and that was fine. He ended up doing it. But we had 13 vehicles in Blue Care at the time, and this is in the early 80s. And so that meant 13 sisters going out every weekday to care for people in their homes. We had Nazareth Village, which was an 80-bed hostel, and we had a 106-bed nursing home. So it was quite a large operation. Now, I shared with the staff every week, or those who would come for a little devotional every Tuesday morning, I think it might have been. And some of the staff celebrated the church's values as they devoted themselves day in, day out to the people in their care. I know they got paid, but you know, there's a difference between someone working just for money and someone showing real care. And it was much, much more than a job for many of them. They were truly glad to be working under the umbrella of the church and of God. They had a sense of fulfilling their life's calling. It was an expression of this real religion that James spoke about. They were actively living out their love for their neighbour as Jesus commanded, looking after people who were absolutely dependent on their care. But the great majority of them rarely gave time to gathering for worship on a Sunday. I guess some of them probably thought, well, at least I go to the staff devotions on a Tuesday morning. If we look at what Jesus had to say in the Gospels, then he also seems to endorse our text from James. Let me give two examples. In Matthew 25, Jesus said that when we care for the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, and the prisoner, then we're caring for him. Jesus was making the radical statement that we meet him in the person of the hungry, the stranger, the sick person. That makes me think, well, where would Jesus be in the world today? He'd be at Karzai airport in Kabul with those who are suffering. Jesus was emphasizing how critical our love of neighbour is, and of course that was one of his two great commandments. In another context, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said that others would recognize his followers in the fruit that our lives produce. In other words, our actions, our behaviour towards others, they are what matter, the way we treat our fellow human beings. And then a few verses earlier in the letter, James writes, "But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves, not hearers who forget, but doers who act." I remember times as a child, and I expect you might remember some too, where you heard your parents calling out to you and you chose not to hear. And because you didn't want to have to do something they wanted you to do. Well, James is writing here, you can be like someone who looks at their image in the mirror and goes away and forgets what they look like. He's saying we must not just be hearers, but we must be doers also. In fact, in the next chapter, James says it differently when he declares faith without works is dead. In other words, there's no real faith there if there's nothing that your faith produces, if there's no actions that come out of your faith. We may claim we have a relationship with God, but there must be some evidence in our actions. Imagine that being a Christian was against the law in Australia. Australian society is heading that way, but I don't think it'll happen in our lifetime. Imagine if being a Christian in Australia was against the law. If you or I were then arrested by the police and charged for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict us? What evidence would the police present in court to say you're a Christian? Would our regular attendance at worship be enough? Maybe, if we're an underground church. Another key text for today is in the words of Jesus in our gospel reading. He was being critical of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the Jewish religious leaders, and he borrowed a prophecy from Isaiah, which was 700 years old. He says to the Pharisees, "This people honours me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." I remember doing a children's address where I had kids come out and there was a heart on I'd just drawn on a card, and a set of lips, divorced from the whole face, but it doesn't matter, a set of lips. And sorry, David, I'm making this tough for you. I put them apart. I had a child holding each one and saying, "These people say they love me, but their actions give no evidence of that." Can I move back here? These Pharisees may say the right things, but they do not obey the commands of God. They fail to show that they care for God and God's ways. Consider if these words of Jesus apply to us as a congregation. This people honours me with their lips. Surely we do that. We're responding with praise and love to the God, every Sunday when we gather for worship. Maybe in our prayers through the week, we are honouring God with our lips. We're good at singing the hymns of faith, listening to the words of the preacher about God and Jesus and the Spirit, joining in the prayers prayed by somebody up front. We have lots of words in our Sunday services. Can you imagine how many? I think it's got to be about 8,000 words in our Sunday services. Don't bother counting. Ideally, as we gather for worship, our hearts are focused on God. We are responding with praise and love to the God who loves us steadfastly. We are opening our hearts to God in prayer so that God may claim us and form us as his people. We are coming together in Christian community because we want to honour God together. The public sees us gather in our church buildings week by week, and concludes that we are here because we care about God. We are a people who live to love this mighty and gracious God. The cross on our buildings is a reminder to us that we are followers of Jesus who died for us. Our corporate worship is an expression of our love to God, loving God with our whole heart, soul, mind and strength, loving God with all that we are, as Jesus commanded. But such love cannot be confined or limited to 1 hour each week. I'm not saying we necessarily should be gathering full time here in church. I'm saying this love should find expression in our lives every day. But what if our words in church are divorced from the rest of our lives? What if our lips and our lives don't match? What if our lives demonstrate no connection with the love and truth, the forgiveness and faithfulness of God? What if our bodies go to worship but our hearts are somewhere else? What if we come to church but we are not prepared to open ourselves up to God because there are things we are trying to hide from God? Who hasn't done that? What if we have sacrificed our integrity so we are not truly present to God in spite of being in the building? If so, then we may be honouring God with our lips while our hearts are far from God, as Jesus said. Now, when the Pharisees lived this kind of hypocrisy, Jesus said to them, and we also may need to hear these words, "You get worked up about eating the right foods, avoiding the unclean foods, but I tell you that they cannot make you unclean. It is from the human heart that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." Probably the longest list of evils, if you like, in the Bible. Jesus was very aware of many ways in which a person's heart could be enticed away from God. But in both Bible readings today, there's a warning about evil in our lives. Jesus said, evil comes from within. Other parts in the Bible, it says it starts in the mind. James wrote that we should keep ourselves from being stained by the world or guard against the corruption the world presents to us. Our hearts can embrace the evil ways of the world around us, but God provides a way out of evil. God calls us to repentance, to a turning from evil, a turning to God. And every Sunday we have an act of confession of sin where we offer to God the ways we have gone off track, and we seek God's forgiveness as He instructed. Every Sunday we receive God's forgiveness so that our past acts have no continuing power over us. And of course, if we know we're very aware of we need to put something right with God during the week, we don't have to wait till Sunday. Our son Stephen was playing games as a young boy with people who were looking after him. And when we went to pick him up, the father said, Stephen cheated. And at his age, I'm not surprised. I probably did myself. And I said to Stephen, being a minister, and this is one of the elders of the church, he was telling me this, a keen Christian, and I said, Stephen, when you say your prayers tonight, you better ask God's forgiveness. Well, Matthew came back at me and he said, no, don't wait till tonight, do it now. We can easily embrace evil, give in some way. But every Sunday, God plants His word of truth in our hearts, and it gradually takes root in our lives over against the seductive lies of many other clamouring voices. Every Sunday, we open ourselves to the Spirit of God and ask Him to lead us in the ways of righteousness. God helps us to conquer our self-centered ways and leads us into acts of compassion towards others. Jesus told the Pharisees that their hearts were far from him, so much so that all their words didn't count. Where are our hearts? What do we have a heart for? Where do we devote our time? What are we passionate about? I've regularly reflected on my hard-heartedness. When Jenny tells me she has a pain of some kind, I can be indifferent. I've heard that before. And she probably told me last night as well. And I probably didn't do as much responding to her as I might have. You know, we can become cynical about a range of things, and I have, and I need a softening of my heart. It needs to happen regularly because the encrustedness, I guess, can just continue to grow. And that my heart for others can be eroded away by my self-interest. And so at times, my care for others has been reduced by a growing harshness. And so half-heartedness has got in the way of my heart for God. But I'd like to present a more positive way of thinking about our hearts as well, because I believe that God has placed a particular passion or two in our hearts. It's not just a passion for sport, or for the theatre, or for reading, or for music, but it's a passion which God wants us to learn to use to bless others and give him glory. Now, you may or you may not be aware of your God-given passion or passions. It may be a passion to share your faith one-to-one. It may be a passion to care for the elderly, just as many Blue Care staff do, and lots of other people. It may be a passion to advocate for the young and the vulnerable, as Elisa Williams shared with us 2 weeks ago when she spoke about her work in school chaplaincy. It may be a passion to pray for those who are struggling in life. It may be a passion to support your neighbours, whatever their needs. God has given us a heart for him, for God, and for others. Otherwise, why would God command us to love him with all that we are and to love our neighbours as we love ourselves? So I want to conclude with two texts I've shared with you today. James 1:27, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to care for orphans and widows in their distress, to keep oneself unstained by the world. In Mark 7:6-7, this people honours me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. Did you see? In vain do they worship me? If we don't care for others, our worship is in vain. The good news is, and let me give you good news, because for many years when I preached, I think I sent people home with commands and instructions, and we should be doing better, and put burdens on their backs. The good news is that God never intended us to live this life of obedience without his help. God has given us his Spirit to form us, to equip us, to empower us to be disciples of integrity. And if there's one word that captures what I'm talking about today, it's this phrase, or the word integrity, and disciples of integrity as a phrase. Let's seek to be true to who we are, to be open and honest with God and with one another. Amen.